Everyone! Okay, we are now starting the hustings. Everyone please be quiet and allow for a respectful debate to emerge. Okay, so firstly we'll be taking some pre-prepared questions that people have emailed in. Actually, no, before that, we'll allow for introductory statements from the four candidates. So without any further ado, we'll allow the first candidate to speak. Have we got the random number generator there? We're using a random number generator to see who's going first, and the first candidate to speak is... Drum roll not needed, but thank you very much. Once this thing loads... Okay, Julian Hubbard, first candidate to speak.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, and it's great to be back here and to see so many of you again. I got into politics because of my values. I'm a liberal. I care about making sure that people can do what they want to do with their lives. And that's why I've been taking action like a pupil premium to help people to get going. Why we've done things like allow same-sex marriage for the first time, so we don't discriminate against people simply because of who they love. I'm an internationalist. I'm proud we're part of the European Union, that we work across borders to improve our lives and our economy, and also to tackle those huge challenges of cross-border crime, environmental issues. I also think we should get rid of things like Trident. I don't think we should spend billions of pounds being able to blow other people up and killing millions and millions of people at once. We can spend that money much better. For example, a bill that I championed, was co-sponsored, is now law, to make sure that we will actually do what we can to help the poorest in the world with international aid, something I know many of you take very seriously. I'm also concerned about the environment. So I stood up and led the fight against fracking. I championed decarbonisation, and I've been fighting for a nature bill to look after biodiversity. And just yesterday, we got the great news of the biggest marine conservation area in the world. I also care about social justice. So I've pushed for the living wage, increased income tax thresholds, people get to keep more of what they need, poor people don't pay income tax, and taken up issues like stopping revenge evictions. And I care about our wonderful city, where I grew up. I came here when I was 3 months old, and I've lived and worked here ever since. We get the least money for education here. That is not right. And as of April, we'll get an extra £23.2 million. So our schools are not the worst funded in the country. £30 million extra to build new school places. Here at this wonderful sixth form college, one of the big challenges is that unlike a school sixth form, they have to pay VAT. £300,000 a year taken away from giving you education, a fight I've led in Parliament. I've also got more money into our NHS, £20 million coming soon, including more into mental health. And I was delighted with the extra £1.25 billion we've just got into young people's mental health, something that should be ignored for far too long. And I fought for more housing here so you could afford somewhere to live, and better transport, for walking, for cycling, for cheaper rail fares, for more rail routes, and for a 2/3 discount off bus users if you're under 21. And I've been prepared to stand up to the government where I've had to. I voted against tuition fees, against Andrew Lansley's Health and Social Care Act, against military intervention in Syria and Iraq. There's much, much more I could talk about. The need to change our drugs policy, about the fight against revenge porn, about digital rights and Snowden. Far, far more. But if you want somebody who will stand up for your values and shares those values, if you want somebody who's shown that they're independent-minded and hard-working, who will deliver for you, then I hope when the election comes round, you will back me. Thank you very much for listening.
Next to speak, Rupert Reed.
Thank you. It's fabulous to be back at this sixth form college. When I was here a few weeks ago, I spoke with you about the bankrupt ideologies of the three old parties and how the Green Party has the values, vision, ideology and philosophy for the 21st century. Ecologism, taking what is viable, what is still viable from liberalism, socialism and conservatism, and putting that together on a solid foundation of the one planet that we share and whose planetary limits non-negotiably we must respect if we are to have a future. Now, yesterday in the budget, we saw a budget that absolutely scandalously flew in the face of us having a chance of having that common future together, as the Chancellor threw more money not at renewable energy, but at subsidising the outdated fossil fuel industries of this country. That is an absolute disgrace. It will redound to the detriment of all of you and to your children. The Green Party is the only party that's serious about offering a different way forward, an actual green future. Julian talks a good talk, but be under no illusions. He is in a party, the Lib Dems, that has propped up this government. This government that's done everything that you saw in the budget yesterday. If you want to have an MP who is actually going to be able to vote for the things that they care about and deliver them, who is going to vote for more money for renewable energy and against more money for fossil fuels, who's going to vote to get rid of Trident and be part of a party that actually believes in getting rid of Trident, then the choice is extremely clear. The Green Party is the only party at this election standing up with a clear green philosophy for the future, and the only party that is standing up against austerity. Listen very carefully to what Julian and Daniel from Labour have to say to you about the budget this afternoon, when they tell you, as I'm sure they will, that they don't believe in everything that the Chancellor from the Conservatives argued for yesterday. Now, they believe in a kinder, gentler austerity, whereas we in the Greens believe in ending austerity, and we have the money to put behind that programme because we want to get rid of Trident, because we want to get rid of subsidies to nuclear power and to fossil fuels, because we want to really tackle and target tax evasion and cut it off at the root. So that's the way forward. If you guys are going to have a serious, a real future, you need to get radical, you need to get serious at this election. This seat was our third strongest seat, the Green Party's third strongest seat in 2010. I need your support. The Green Party is getting lots of support now among young people. We're as popular as Labour are among young people. I'd like your support, and I look forward to hearing your questions. Thank you.
Next candidate to speak, Chamali Fernando.
Hello, good afternoon everyone. When I last came here, there were people sitting on the floor and I thought to myself, I'm a lawyer, I thought, is this a health hazard? I now see that there are people trying to climb in through the windows on this side. I'm very impressed at the level of political engagement at this school. So my name's Chamali Fernando, I'm 36 years old, I'm the Conservative parliamentary candidate for Cambridge, and I'm campaigning full-time to turn Cambridge blue. I've been a barrister for 12 years, and I've represented people from all walks of life, people who are facing jail, the loss of their home, the loss of their job, collapse of their business. And what I have seen is what drives me into politics, and I believe that I am the candidate to deliver a better deal for the people of Cambridge. One of my messages in this campaign is about making Cambridge the global benchmark for a fairer, greener, sustainable society. And it is with your support that I can achieve that. I've been a policy advisor to set up an international court for the environment, so I would like to see the environment jump to the top of the political agenda. We've now come out of a recession. It has been difficult. We've had to make difficult choices, including a tough choice of joining hands with the Lib Dems in the interest of moving this country forward. But now that we've done that, you had yesterday a budget that is going to deliver more for Cambridge. So, for example, Cambridge is being allowed to keep, in the future, additional revenue that it receives from business rates that are collected locally, because Cambridge is recognised as a thriving city, and this government, this Conservative Party, will back thriving cities. We've put money into science in Cambridge, 7 billion. We've put 300 million into human genome decoding. We've put 4.8 million into a technology centre. This has all come from central government. Julian doesn't realise there's actually no I in team. The reality is you have to balance the books to be able to put money into things. And that's what we've achieved in Cambridge. I'm also an attorney qualified in New York. And I think one of the greatest opportunities when you're young is to embrace your education. You don't realise actually until you start working how cool it was to be in school and actually learn more and more. So I would like to say to young people, what we're offering is a rigorous academic curriculum, but that is designed to get you the to be able to compete on the global jobs market. So I want to see every child learn a language at school so that they can access the global jobs market. I don't think we should say to any child, oh, it's okay, you're only good at football, don't worry about the rest. No, that's not good enough, and I will not stand for that. This is your opportunity, your chance, the clearest choice in a generation to turn Cambridge blue. The Conservatives came second in 2010. With your support, we can come first. Thank you very much.
The final opening statements will be made by Daniel Zeichner.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's very good to see a number of you that I've crossed swords with before, talking about immigration, the European Union, when I was here before. Let me tell you just a bit, first of all, about why I believe I'm the best person to represent the whole of Cambridge, because I'm the person with the broad life experience here. My first job before I went to university was as a milkman on one of the toughest council estates in South London. And I tell you, I learned more in those few months about what it's like actually out there with the wider population than you'll ever learn, I'm afraid, in a lot of the jobs that the people on the rest of this platform have been doing. I then went to King's, did a history degree. My first job after that was at Shire Hall up the road in information technology. Since then I've worked at Perkins Engines in Peterborough, done a whole range of jobs in the private sector and the public sector, and that's important because if you're trying to represent the whole city, you need to understand what other people's lives are like. 10 years ago I moved back to Cambridge. Just before that I'd started working for a national trade union, Unison, representing low-paid workers, healthcare assistants, people who work in classrooms, some of the people here doing the low-paid jobs. And that gives me a very different perspective because as a Labour politician, for me, social justice is at the core. Now, I've listened carefully to my opponents today about what they're offering you in the future, and I don't hear much about the future. I hear a defence of the past from Julian. I don't hear him apologising for the fact that he's propped up a Tory government for the last 5 years, bedroom tax, tuition fees, the list is endless. But I'm going to talk about what Labour will actually do for you. And I tell you, it's votes, it's jobs, it's homes. Votes, first of all. A lot of you actually probably won't get a vote this year. We'll lower the voting age to 16, absolutely for certain. Won't necessarily help you, but it'll help the future generation coming along. Jobs. Across the country, far too many young people are out of jobs. Not necessarily in Cambridge, but it's a huge problem across the country, and Labour will guarantee a job for 18 to 25-year-olds. That makes such a difference. We did it before and it worked. We know it works. It can be done. Scrapped by this government, of course. Homes. Where are you going to live? How are you going to afford a home in Cambridge? No chance at the moment, given what's been happening. Rents up a quarter in the last year in this city. People priced out. You haven't got a chance. What we will do is we'll say half the new homes that are being built should be available to first-time buyers. We'll say 3-year tenancies if you're renting a home. That's the kind of practical difference that we can make. And pay. So a lot of you, I've spoken to some of you, I recognise you on the doorstep. You're on 0 hours contracts. Low pay in this city is a real problem. 12,000 people in this city earning less than £7.85 an hour. That's outrageous. So what will Labour do about it? We will crack down on those exploitative 0 hours contracts. We will increase the minimum wage by £3,000 by the end of this Parliament. We will make sure that employers like Microsoft in this city that refuse to pay a living wage actually are brought to the table. And then finally, the thing that no one talked about, tuition fees. Isn't it amazing they don't want to talk about it? We know what happened last time, don't we? Nick Clegg came here to this very city with Julian, the famous picture, and what was the promise? We will scrap tuition fees. And what happened? Well, you all know what happened next. It was a Liberal Democrat, Vince Cable, who tripled them to £9,000, crippling levels of debt. Well, Labour's absolutely clear. When you're at university, and most of you will be, this year, you won't be paying £9,000, you'll be paying £6,000. And the student grant will be going up for the vast majority of people. So, a clear offer from Labour. My challenge to this lot is, what's it going to be from you? Because Liberals and Tories so far refuse to rule out further rises in tuition fees. So you may not be paying £9,000. It could be 12, it could be 15, it could be the sky's the limit. But with Labour, it's 6. So there's a clear difference, and I'll conclude on 2 big issues. Europe, that's the other big issue. Vote for any of these, and we will be sleepwalking out of the European Union in a referendum over which we have no control. Labour will keep Britain in the European Union. That is vital to Cambridge and vital to Britain. And on climate change, it is Labour that's got the strong record on climate change, Labour that will decarbonise the power sector, Labour that will preserve our planet. If you're thinking about voting Green, all you're doing is putting the Tories back in through the back door. If you think about voting the Liberal Democrats, all you're doing is putting the Conservatives back in through the front door. So if you don't want a Conservative government for the next 5 years, you know what to do, and it's well worth voting for. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Eichner. And if I could just please ask the people at the back to be a bit more quiet so we can actually hear the candidates properly. Well, if you could just be quiet so it would be easier for you to hear us, that would be great. The first question that has been emailed to the Student Council has been from Joseph McLeish, and he has asked what the candidates' views and what their party's views are on genetically modified crops. So, first candidate to speak on the random number generator is Daniel Zeichner.
Right. Okay, this was a very big issue 10, 15 years ago. It continues to be an issue. My view has always been we needed to proceed with caution. When Michael Meacher, who was an excellent environmental minister for Labour, oversaw this whole process in this country before, what we did was we proceeded carefully on the basis of science and evidence. And we didn't get very far because, to be honest, what was quite clear was that the way it had been introduced by the big multinational companies, they'd completely failed to explain the potential benefits to the British public, and the British public were not convinced. But my party's view, and it's my view too, is that we should not exclude the benefits of this kind of technology in future. Yes, we need to be careful because the geography of Britain is different. It's different from some of the big countries in other parts of the world where you can separate the crops much more carefully. But we're not shutting the door on GM technology, particularly in a science-based city like Cambridge, where so many developments can be made. Who knows what the future will bring? The other evening, Rupert and I and we were all discussing the future of animal welfare and how we feed the world. Actually, one of the ways we may need to feed the world is through more imaginative ways of developing food. So for Labour, we will proceed carefully, protect our environment, but don't shut the door on technology that's possibly life-transforming and transform the lives of millions of people across the planet.
Next candidate to speak, Tamai Fernando.
Thank you. Unexpected there. I personally am not in favour of genetically modified crops. I can't see the merit in interfering with nature. However, if I'm persuaded on a scientific basis that there is merit, I'll be willing to consider it. My personal view is that in terms of our food security for this country, there are things that we can do. We don't need to look at genetically modified crops in that sense. And so, generally, I would say I'm not in favour of it.
Next candidate, Julian Huppert.
I have to say the volume levels make me feel very much at home in the House of Commons. And I have to say some of the tribalism that we've seen also feels very, very much at home with what we see in that. But rather than talk about the details and factualities, let me talk about GM crops. Is the person who asked the question here, by the way? Stunned silence. Right, okay. My issue isn't with the idea of GM. And when I hear people saying we shouldn't interfere with nature, I think, you know, how natural are all the lights that we have? How natural are the clothes that we wear? We don't just live out in a field somewhere. But to me, the problem isn't about GM. Yes, we should be careful. Yes, we should check what happens with it. We shouldn't just rush headlong. We should be very, very careful, look at the evidence. To me, the big problem is not about the GM bit of it. It's about how it's used. It's the power of the massive companies that want to implement this around the world. That terrifies me. Whether or not the actual thing they're selling is a good thing, it's the fact that they're having huge power. It's a Terminator strains, which means that farmers who plant some of these crops can't use the seeds the next year to replant them, making the farmers permanently, utterly dependent on this one company. It's a strains that require you to use one particular fertiliser, which is only sold by this one company. So the sciencey bit is okay with me. We need to be careful, we need to be sensible. What we mustn't do is allow any large multinationals to have even more control over farming around the world than they already have. That just traps us forever in a very, very dangerous place.
finally, Rupert Reed.
Okay, so thank you. This is one of a whole slew of issues where the lines are actually extremely clear. Green Party on one side, all of the other parties on the other. Because make no mistake from what you've just heard, all the doubts and cautions and so on, Labour, Conservative, Lib Dems, they're all in favour of GM food, and we in the Green Party are against it. Why are we against it? Two reasons. Firstly, precaution, the precautionary principle. We ought not to do something which messes with nature in a way that could have disastrous consequences. Right? It's not just we're about talking about these lights, Julian. The point is that when you interfere with the genetic codes of plants out there in the wild, that's doing something radically different, something whose consequences we cannot control. So I'm a philosopher of science. I've written and published on this, on why there's a very strong precautionary argument against GM. If you're interested, do go away and read my articles on it. Second reason why we should not go down the GM route was alluded to by Julian, but we have to get serious about it. The reason why, make no mistake about this, the reason why there's this big push towards GM is because of all the pound signs that massive companies like Monsanto see in their eyes around this issue. It's not about feeding the world. That's rubbish. That really is garbage. What it's about is massive profits for a few corporate companies that want to take control of the food chain and own it forever. Don't let them. Stand firm against GM.
Thank you very much. The second question emailed in was from Kartik Thera, who asked, what will you and your parties do to make sure that something like the Great Recession never happens again? Again, first on the list, Daniel Zeigner.
Well, so that's quite a big question, but I'll tell you what, the answer's quite simple. Don't trust the financial sector. What happened with the Great Recession of the period we saw 10 years ago? I mean, obviously historians will know there have been recessions before, but what was different about this one was that the financial sector were off doing a whole series of things that, frankly, most of the world had no idea about. During that period, Labour was actually castigated for calling for more regulation. I remember doing a debate at the Cambridge Union in about 2006, soon after I was selected as a Labour candidate. Vince Cable for the Liberal Democrats was speaking against me, and he came along and we were talking about the economy, and he said, let me first of all concede that Labour and Gordon Brown have got the economy absolutely right. That's what he said in 2006. He then went on to attack me for a whole range of other things, but on the economy, the broad consensus was that Western economies were doing pretty well. But what we didn't know was that all these guys in the city, very clever people, who were busy doing these derivative swaps, all these kind of crazy deals with the subprime market in America that no one really understood. No politicians were looking at it closely enough. Now, you can argue that the regulatory regime wasn't tough enough at the time, and Labour fully accepts, in retrospect, that is the case. So, how do you stop it happening again? Well, first of all, don't trust the people in the financial sector. Incidentally, the very people who are completely bankrolling the modern Conservative Party. That's why nothing much is happening at the moment, because George Osborne and co are completely in hock to the hedge funds. Don't trust the financial sector, but put in place a regulatory framework that safeguards ordinary people's standards of living, because the disgrace is on this, the people who actually caused the problem have largely got away scot-free. No one's mentioned poverty in this city so far. 4,000 people using the Cambridge Food Bank. 4,000 people. Question to Julian, are you going to apologise to them for propping up a government that's created an economic system that leaves 4,000 people needing to be fed? People who are turned away from the Unemployment Benefits Office and told don't come back for 3 months or 6 months? No food for them? That's what I'm passionate about. So I don't want a recession again of this kind of scale, and I want to make sure in future that when we do have economic downturns, the people at the bottom are protected, because at the moment there's nothing to help them. Thank you.
The second candidate to speak on this issue, Julian Huppert.
Well, thank you. I don't know if you guys want us to do the sort of party political tit for tat bit that Daniel wants to play.
No, I just want you to
it really annoys me.
Julian.
But what was interesting is that we have had somebody who promised to get rid of boom and bust. Gordon Brown said he had abolished boom and bust. And then we had that fantastic, that colossal crash in 2008. It was absolutely disastrous. Vince Cable, who had predicted some of it, not every aspect, described it as a heart attack in our system, and he's absolutely right. And that damage has taken a huge amount, and I wish things had got better faster, absolutely. I wish every heart attack patient was absolutely fine the next day, but they're not, and I don't blame the nurses who are looking after them, I don't blame the doctors. They had a heart attack. So what we have to do is to avoid the sort of arrogance that led to people thinking we could just abolish, boom and bust. We had the banks that were far too big to fail, where we couldn't make them take the risk. That is simply not something we have to do. We have to have more of a dispersed financial sector so we are not so vulnerable. So that if people gamble with their own money and they lose money, then they lose money. We aren't forced to step in. We should protect retail banking and do what we've started the process of doing, separating it from the casino banking. We should also make sure we have an economy that's actually much more about people, what people want to do. That's more about investment for the longer term, not short-term financial speculation. That means we invest directly, not just always in more and more PFI projects, as we saw under the last government. We do more about manufacturing, not just the City of London, that we see growth around the entire country. We see more skills. And we also have to tackle the fact that we have so much debt tied up in a housing bubble. Vast amounts of money and overinflated house prices that just keep going up. The only answer to that works is to build more houses. Otherwise, you'll simply not make it. The estimates are you need 225,000 more houses a year just to keep pace with the population, with households breaking up. So we would build 300,000 houses a year, so we start to bring that under control. We move away from a culture of debt and towards a more sensible and more sustainable economy, an economy that works better with the resources that we have available. I can't promise that will absolutely avoid any prospect of recession, but then I can't promise that if you behave healthily, you will never get a heart attack. I can promise it is less likely and will be less severe.
Third candidate to speak on this issue, Rupert Reed.
So, getting better. Okay, starting point with this, we must make sure that we don't have an uncontrolled depression. That is very much a possibility right now because there is very much a possibility of another massive financial crash in the next few years. Why? Because fundamentally the financial markets have not been reformed since the disasters of 2007 to 8 because the neoliberal parties don't have the will to do it. So how do we make sure that given that those circumstances are in place that we don't have a strong risk of such an uncontrolled depression? The answer is we need to transform our economy in the way that the Greens are promising. It's called a Green New Deal, a green jobs programme that would transform our economy by making it dependent not on fossil fuels, not on the energies of the past, but on the energies and industries of the future. And a massive rollout of a programme to insulate every single building in Britain. Right now we're heating the sky in most of our buildings. It's absolutely absurd. Let's put people into work and ensure that we have a transition to a serious green economy in the future. And that'll cut off at the knees any possible depression. But of course, what the people have said so far is absolutely right, that we do have a very, very serious problem with big finance. What are we going to do about it? Well, let's start out by looking a little bit at history. Daniel takes pride in what the last Labour government achieved. But let's be extremely clear. Gordon Brown did not regulate to stop the kinds of disasters that happened in 2007 to 8. He allowed all of this casino stuff to go ahead, all this speculation to go ahead. That's because Labour have essentially sold out to the financial interests. They're not funded by them as much as the Conservatives are, but they invite them to their conferences, they invite them into their meetings all the time, they want to be on side with them all the time, right? We in the Greens say, no, big finance needs to be put on a leash, firmly on a leash. What does that mean? It's not enough just to separate casino banking from retail banking. We need to have a bank that is permanently owned by the people, for the people. Banking should become a public service again. So we say, keep the RBS public forever. Turn it into a Bank of Britain. When I was speaking at the Bank of England a fortnight ago, I was invited to speak at the Bank of England a fortnight ago because of my work on precaution. They asked me, how can we insure ourselves against a future financial crash? And I said, what you need to do is make illegal the kind of financial instruments that led to the disaster in 2007 to 8. financial instruments that were allowed by successive Labour and Conservative governments. We need to prohibit those kinds of toxic derivatives from being able to happen at all, because they are like a cancer in our economy, a disease, a virus in our financial ecosystem. So that's what the Greens would do: transform our economy in a green direction, return us towards full employment, and have serious, radical reform of the financial industry to make sure that what happened in 2007 to 8 can never happen again.
So Labour introduced the tripartite system of regulation, which enabled banks to hide behind 3 different financial conduct authorities, which caused this collapse. There were warning signals on the economy. Where it went wrong was that Labour presided for 12 months knowing that Bradford and Bingley was about to collapse, knowing about Northern Rock and knowing about RBS. Don't let it happen again. Don't vote Labour, because it is a politics and economy of chaos. What you want is a competitive banking system so that there is more retail banking, that banking is in the interest of the consumer. You also want stronger regulation, which we have introduced under this government, to keep an economy strong, and we are currently the fastest growing economy in Europe. To keep an economy strong, it's about sound management of the books, balancing the books all the time, and that is what George Osborne has done under this government. We have introduced and created 760,000 new startups since coming into office. That's because no business, unless you're an insolvency practitioner, will start in a recession. Business needs to feel right. The conditions are right. If I start a business today, I'm not going to lose. So business needs to feel confidence in the economy, which they get with a Conservative government. 1.85 million jobs have been created since we took office. That's not David Cameron going around and handing everyone a job. No, that is businesses feeling it is right for my firm to expand now. I have confidence in the jobs market. I have confidence in the economy, and that gives you all the opportunity to access those jobs. Now, we in the Conservatives have said that we want to move to a system of full employment, which is where every single person who wants to work is able to get a job. So, to keep us on this continued path of recovery, you have seen you can judge it for yourselves. But bear in mind, what did Labour know and why did they keep quiet? They were embarrassed. And they did get warning signals from Vince Cable saying, look, aren't we going to deal with this? Aren't we going to deal with that? And they failed to deal with it. So you need tougher regulation, you need a strong economy to go forward, but you need people to manage that economy. So you've got a choice: the economy chaos or the competent management of the economy with the Conservatives.
Thank you very much. The final pre-prepared question comes for us from Grace Masuki. Masuki? I don't know, sorry. Her question is, how will the candidates and their parties deal with the problem of religious radicalisation and extremism in this country, particularly with young people living in the UK today? First person to answer this question is Chamali Fernando.
So some of you may know from my last visit, I grew up in Leicester. I was born and raised there. It's a city that's described as the #1 non-white majority city in Europe. And unfortunately, there is a huge problem of social integration. We do in Leicester have all these diverse mixed communities, but it's unlike Cambridge. People don't mix with each other. So you'll get the Somalian sector on one side, you'll get Punjabis on another side. People don't mix, and that is damaging for society going forward. So greater social integration is required. In terms of radicalisation of our youths, what message is the BBC putting out there by showing the beheading, the actual people in orange jumpsuits with someone behind them wielding a knife? That message is not good for these youngsters who are very vulnerable. I think it's important to make sure that we build a society. And the media might have poo-pooed David Cameron's big society, but I tell you what, that should be the future of this country. We should care about our neighbours. We should care about our children. We should worry about why 3 girls have gone off to Syria and their parents weren't able to stop them from going? What message were they given to make them feel? These were really top quality students. They were A-star students who were performing well in school, suddenly felt that their vocation was to go off and do something else. So it's about what message we have and what care we show our youngsters of today. So it's all about us all being vigilant, but also we need measures in place to enable governments, to enable our police forces to work together, to enable our security services to work together. We don't hear, we're lucky, we don't hear about the daily combating of security threats on our country. As a barrister, I've been to the Royal Courts of Justice on several occasions. There's a sign up there. We all get checked. Body check. What are you carrying? What's in your bag, etc. What might be on your person? It says, pretty much every time I've been in there, it says that we are on, it tells you the security threat that we're on, whether it's red alert or black alert. Now, you see that when you go into court. I don't think that they've actually told us what severe level of security threat we're on, but to see that on a regular basis means that there is something wrong in this country, that we have managed to have homegrown terrorists who are willing to put people's lives at stake in this country. My parents came from Sri Lanka, a country that had to tackle the problem of homegrown terrorism, and it was very difficult. And there was a group called the Tamil Tigers of Elam, and they pioneered suicide bombing. The fact that in the West we have people who are willing to blow themselves up to kill someone else means that the thinking has gone wrong somewhere. So I would like to see within different community sectors, within different religious groups, more talking to youngsters and understanding what these problems are. And as soon as someone's got a problem, they should be able to come forward and go to social services or probation and say, right, I think there's a problem with my child, or I think there's a problem with my friend, or I think there's a problem, and not be frowned upon. And we need to see what has gone wrong in society. But it's all part of everyone being vigilant and everyone taking care of each other as well.
Three quick things. If we can remind people behind the crowds to be a bit more quiet, that'd be amazing. Second, if we can remind the candidates to keep their answers slightly more brief, given that we need to have some time to open it up to the floor and for closing statements. And thirdly, I'd like to introduce Daniel Zeigler to speak on the issue.
Well, I will be brief because actually I agree with a lot of what Shamali's just said about that. I don't think this is actually a party political point. I think it's a profoundly difficult question. I think it goes to the heart of the challenges we face in this century in a globalised world. People can move around much more. Telecommunications mean that people can see much more about what's happening in other parts of the world. These are not easy issues. What Labour did, and I think actually Labour was right to do this, was try and intervene proactively in advance through a programme called the Prevent Programme, which was about trying to build tolerance and understanding between communities. That's slow, painstaking, often difficult work. I would criticise the current government because they've actually narrowed that down much more to a police-based security approach, and the Shadow Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, was with me a few months ago talking to the Cambridge Police exactly about this, and they agree with that. I spoke to Muslim College last week, and I have to say that some of the young women there told me about the insults they get on the streets of Cambridge, which I think is sad because by and large we have good community relations in Cambridge, but don't be under any illusion, it's not all great. I took the Shadow International Development Secretary Mary Cray to see people at the mosque the other week, and they too explained some of the problems that they face. I would say in Cambridge the thing that we do really well is that we do have good relationships between the various communities in the city, and I think it's fantastic when you get people going into the mosque, particularly on days like Mill Road Winter Fair Day, because I've learned so much about other communities through the job that I do, but I know that many other people in Cambridge don't really understand what other people's lives in Cambridge are like. And that goes back to my point right at the very beginning. Cambridge is a very complicated set of communities. You've got to work really hard to understand all of it. So in answer to the question, it needs lots of detailed, hard work to try and build relationships between communities. All of that can be undone ever so quickly by one stupid act, and we've seen some of those things, but you only achieve these things by working and being optimistic, and I am an optimist.
Sorry, again, can we be brief so we have at least some time for open floor? Third speaker to speak on this issue, Julian Hubbard.
I mean, this is a really, really tough question. It's a great question. It's something I've been working on for a few years on the Home Affairs Select Committee, where we've been trying to come to grips with it. So I've actually met the families of the 3 girls who went to try to understand what happened, what led to this. And there aren't really any simple answers. I agree with what has been said. I mean, there's no justifying much of what's been happening, but part of it is to do with some of our history in the Middle East, with Israel and Palestine, with the Iraq War. Some of that is used as a rallying cry. It's also to do with what we do locally with stop and search, where Muslims, young Muslim men in particular, are far more likely to be stopped and searched by the police than white people. That's simply not okay, and it creates this sort of festering complaint about discrimination. It's not a justification, but we can do more about that. And yes, the comments we made about social interactions are absolutely right. In Cambridge, not perfect, but much better than some parts of the country. It's also about education and the role that schools can play in bringing people together from different backgrounds rather than segregating them. If you really want to look at some of this, I really would recommend having a look at some of the work by a guy called Majid Nawaz. He was a young Islamist, and he's written a book called Radical. I really recommend it, where he talks about how he became radicalised. What sense it was that made him realise that becoming a radical gave him some power over his community. He ended up in Egypt, in prison there, came out. He now runs the Quilliam Foundation, which is dedicated to counter-radicalisation. Brilliant speaker, brilliant writer. As it happens, he's a Lib Dem parliamentary candidate as well. but actually the book is a phenomenal insight into what happens with these people. And the one thing that for me comes out clearly is how we should deal with this radical narrative. How do you respond? Some people argue we should try to shut down websites, close down YouTube, shut Twitter accounts. A far more effective approach is counter-narrative. If there's a YouTube video of a radical preacher saying you should go and do something extreme, try and get comments from religious leaders or leaders in the community disagreeing. That is the way to rescue people. That is the way to challenge these toxic beliefs.
And finally, Rupert Reed.
So a couple of points to add. Firstly, we need to be really careful not to do things that stoke the causes of extremism. So, for example, the internationally illegal attack on Iraq was an absolute gift to Salafist fundamentalists. And it's a real tragedy that that Labour and Conservative initiated illegal war led to such disasters. Linked to that also, many Muslims, many people in the Middle East are extremely unhappy at what they see as, and quite rightly, the West's soft treatment of Israel when Israel violates international law. Israel occupies much of Palestine. This is completely unacceptable, but unfortunately the mainstream parties, so-called, won't do anything about that. We in the Greens say that just as it's absolutely right to stop arms exports to Saudi Arabia, which our brilliant MP Caroline Lucas has been trying to lead the way on, so it's right to make similar moves against Israel and to consider the possibility of how economic boycott-type measures could actually bring Israel to the negotiating table, and that would undermine some of the roots of extremism. And secondly, I think one of the real reasons why we're getting this kind of picture is because there's too many people in a society like ours who don't feel they've got enough to believe in. Right? There's too much of a sense in our society of anomie, of a state of materialistic, consumeristic kind of blah. People don't think that they have a kind of project to believe in, something to work for, common shared values. Margaret Thatcher famously said, there is no such thing as a society. We in the Greens passionately believe that's wrong. So what we think is that we have policies and ideas and values that could start to bring people together again around a common narrative that might actually be an alternative to some of these extremist narratives. And the most essential aspect of that is the common narrative of saving our common future. Yeah? The common project of actually having a world that we can bequeath to our children and our grandchildren. And if we don't change direction radically, we're not going to have that. So if we start to build on that and have values that work in that direction, maybe we can start to create an alternative that people actually care about enough to be able to want to fight, if you like, for that instead.
Thank you very much to the candidates so far. We're going to open the floor to questions now. We only have time for one question. So does anyone have a burning question that they want to ask, either to one specific candidate or open?
Maybe to two.
Okay, maybe two if they're quick. Come on, someone must want to ask something. Yes, at the back.
Should we legalise cannabis?
Okay. Rupert's going to speak first.
Short answer, yes, we should decriminalise cannabis.
This is something I've worked on for years. We should decriminalise all of these drugs because the war on drugs is simply failing. Portugal shows it can be done. We should allow medical marijuana as well. And we should look at what's happening in the rest of the world, in Uruguay and in states in the US. What we've done at the moment makes harm for people. We lock up 1,000 people a year for possessing drugs. It is not helping. It cannot work. We have to change it.
Yeah, we already have legalised drugs. You know what? They're the biggest killers we've got. They're called alcohol and tobacco. So be careful. Be very careful what you wish for. Labour looked very hard at this in government, changed the classifications. What it led to was a level of confusion that didn't actually help the debate at all. I've long felt we should look at it closely, but I have to say my party is not going to be changing the drug laws in the near future as far as I can see. And just also be careful about when you say legalise cannabis. The kind of cannabis that's available to people at the moment, the skunk, is seriously dangerous, quite clearly leads to very, very dreadful mental health problems for people. So this is a complicated debate, but I would just, as I say, finish by cautioning alcohol and tobacco, 2, legalised drugs, the biggest killers that we're trying to work against. Think it through. Join me for a drink afterwards.
Maybe something else. In my profession, very sadly, I have seen people whose lives have been extremely adversely affected by the use of cannabis over decades. It tends not to be people who've been using for a few years. So I'm not in favour of legalisation. There's a difference between legalisation and decriminalisation. So decriminalisation, there is an argument to say, and some of it goes on already actually, if someone's got cannabis for personal use and they're not really the sort of person that might get involved in drugs in a wider scale, then the police sometimes turn a blind eye because they have to go and deal with other things anyway. There is a burden on our police force. So you don't necessarily need to go down a brand new policy on drugs. In Lambeth, I don't know, some of you might be aware that I used to be a Liberal Democrat and I stood for the London mayoral nominations within the Liberal Democrats, and I lost out to a guy called Brian Paddock, who was the Assistant Deputy Police Chief during the 7/7 bombings. Now, he actually ran a programme in Lambeth to decriminalise cannabis, and it failed massively. So there are lessons to be learnt from this. We do need to be careful. A joint every now and then, I understand people might like it, you know. It's about being sensible. It's about being sensible, and we need to be... I agree with some of what Daniel has said, actually, on this point. Just because I have seen people whose lives have been destroyed by drugs. So I don't want to see that happen to youngsters.
One more quick question. Yeah? Do you want to ask us?
With polls showing the two main parties having less than 60% of the vote, do you think it's time for fairer votes for the UK?
We'll hear from the Conservative side.
Some of my colleagues will say, yes, you should hear fairer votes, but
Sorry,
if
no, we should repeat the question, please.
Oh, sorry.
You repeat it.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
The question was the question was a call for a fairer voting system.
Rewind, deja vu. Some of my colleagues on this panel will say, yes, we should have a fairer voting system. And if we went to a system of proportional representation, he'd be out of office straight away because the Lib Dems are polling 8%. Okay? So we have managed, that's the reality, we have managed with the first past the post system, which we've had for decades, for centuries, we have managed to have a coalition government. Whether you think that's the right thing or the wrong thing, it has happened. So it's not prohibitive of coalition governments. Unfortunately, because the Lib Dems blocked the boundary changes, we now have constituencies that are of different sizes. So there's some constituencies of 100,000 people, some constituencies as small as 60,000 people. And what that leads to, unfortunately, is the person who gets the highest number of votes, the party that gets the highest number of votes overall, may not be the party that forms a government. But you have here in a panel, we have 5, I know there's one guy missing here today, but there are actually 5 candidates standing, and our political system allows the freedom for people to stand in an election. So, in some senses it works. I think you have a clear choice at the next election whether you want a Labour government or whether you want a Conservative government. And I would advocate vote blue this time round in Cambridge and you will get a Conservative government.
Right, I'm a lifelong constitutional reformer, so I would support a change in the voting system. My party is the party that has delivered constitutional change. If you look at proportional representation for the European elections, Scottish Parliament, Welsh Parliament, Scottish local government, London, but actually that hasn't always transformed the situation in a way that people might have expected. And for Parliament, it is still in the end a choice of government. What I can guarantee you is, if Labour wins, we will have a constitutional convention which will go through a lot of these issues, and for the absolutely outrageous, undemocratic House of Lords, which I've spent much of my life working to get rid of, we will have an elected by proportional system, Senate, which will represent the nations and regions of this country. So there is a big chance here. I'm not sure it's going to come again, because I've had to argue very hard with my colleagues in the Labour Party, because there's plenty of people who don't want that kind of change. There's a real chance to do it. Of course, we did have a referendum a few years ago on the alternative vote, which is not everybody's necessarily preferred choice. And what did we find? It was a handful of progressive cities like Cambridge, bits of London that voted for it, but overwhelmingly, I have to say it's because it was associated with Nick Clegg at the time, overwhelmingly it was rejected by the country. But I would like to see change.
I mean, yeah, you know, the current system we have is completely and utterly broken, and it gives really, really bad results. Why should Tony Blair have had a massive majority in Parliament on 36% of the vote? That's simply not right. If you get a third of the vote, you don't get complete power. So yes, we should transform it. We didn't win the AV referendum. Labour couldn't quite decide whether it was more important to do the right thing or attack Nick Clegg, so they sort of sat on the sidelines. And it's a shame. You know, we could have had that. It would have been huge progress. But we do, Daniel's right, we have to go much further. We tried to do House of Lords reform in this Parliament. We had a piece of legislation. It got through its first stages, and then Labour joined up with the Tory right wing to kill it off. I was gutted when that happened. We will have to fix that. We have to fix local elections as well, because we have council after council which doesn't give the right sort of results. We have to change that. Yes, we should do votes at 16. We've been pushing that for a very, very long time. I'm really pleased Labour now agree with us, and I hope that will be something which can happen in the future. And we should finally have a written constitution. One of the shocking things about the coalition negotiations last time was that some of the rules about how you go about a coalition were based on letters written anonymously to the Times many decades ago. How about we write it all down so that people can see how our country actually runs and we can sensibly fix it?
So it's a great question. What Julian said is absolutely right, but you know what? It's only the beginning. Democracy can't just be a formalism, right? Democracy isn't just about voting. Democracy has to mean that the people rule, that the people govern. That's what the word democracy means etymologically, right? Do the people govern in this country today? No. Would the people govern if we changed to having a proportional representation system? Well, a tiny bit more, yes, but we would still be very far from the people governing, because power in this country is overwhelmingly in the hands of the rich, of the media, of large corporations, of the markets. If we mean it about democracy, we have to get serious about reforming those. And only the Green Party is serious about that. I've got a little video about this I want to recommend you to watch. It's in my series of 2-minute reads that you can find on the internet. It's called Democracy, and it outlines how if we're going to have real democracy, then proportional representation can only be the beginning. One more thing. Please don't be bamboozled by the scaremongering from the Conservative and Labour candidate. Use your votes for what you believe in at this election. People are saying no in ever-increasing numbers to the domination of the clapped-out two old parties in this country. At this election, 5-party politics has decisively arrived. You can get a Green in Cambridge if enough of you choose to. Vote for what you believe in. Don't be scared by them.
Thank you very much. It is now time for the closing statements from the candidates. First to make a closing statement, as decided by the random number generator, Rupert Reed.
It's been a great debate, it's been a great discussion. I'm so sorry we haven't had more questions, but I'll be able to hang around for a few minutes if people want to talk with me. I think what's emerged very, very clearly is that among young people there is a real appetite for change in this country. We see that in the polls. We see that on issues like, for example, taking the railways back into public hands. Overwhelmingly popular, even more popular among young people. Only the Green Party are offering it. We see it on issues like people wanting the minimum wage to be a living wage. Only the Green Party are offering that. We're talking about a more equal society, about ending austerity, not just a slightly slower progress towards ending austerity, towards treating people more fairly, and towards taking seriously the shared planet on which we all depend. And that's where I'm going to end as I began. Because if we don't take that seriously, then your lives and the lives of your children are going to be blighted. This is already affecting people very, very severely in countries like Bangladesh and countries in Africa. We saw it affecting us last year in the floods. If we don't get serious on it, and soon, then it is going to be too late by the time you're my age, let alone the age of some of the others on the panel. So, sorry, that was purely illustrative. So please bear in mind, this is the #1 issue of our time. If we're going to be serious about fighting for a shared future, we have to get serious about going green. We have to get serious about tackling the environmental crisis. You can do it. We can do it here in Cambridge. Thank you.
Next for a closing statement, Julian Huppert.
Well, it's been absolutely fantastic to have you all here. I'm really pleased it's so crowded. Even though it's a good few years since I last climbed in, I think it was through that window, in fact. But I don't recommend it, obviously, health and safety and all that sort of thing. But I hope you've got a good sense of who we are as individuals, because one of the great things about our system, unlike, for example, the Israeli system, which is apparently tearing itself apart at the moment, is you vote for the person you want to represent you. Who do you want to represent Cambridge? You don't just vote for the party and for the colour. So you'll hear a lot of stuff about you have to do something because you like somebody. Vote for the person that you would like to see representing here. You've heard a chunk about my values. You've heard a chunk about what I've delivered already. You've heard a bit about what I want to deliver for the future. Proper fair funding for schools. £8 billion extra for the NHS, as the NHS says it needs. Massive improvements in mental health. You've also heard that I've been prepared to be independent-minded, to stand firm in our interests, and I've had to. Hopefully you'll believe that I've been hard-working over the last 5 years. So I hope you'll give me another chance to speak out for you, as I have done for those years. But let me just finish with 2 pleas. Whoever you vote for, please, please vote. Too many young people do not vote, and they miss out on having their say, and policies are designed that are not in your interests and in our interests. So please, make sure you register and vote if you can. And if you're interested, please get involved with the campaigns. All the parties would love to hear from people who want to help out. We do need more people. It's a lot of fun. Hopefully you'll enjoy it, and hopefully you'll get a good result if you choose the right person to work with. Thank you very much for listening. Enjoy the rest of the time.
Next closing statement, Daniel Zeigner.
Well, thank you very much. And it's been quite a shouty event, partly, I guess, because we've had to shout to be heard. But I think that's perhaps made it slightly less discursive than it might have been. At the beginning of my opening statement, I laid down a challenge to the other candidates on a number of issues, and I haven't had any answers on them, particularly on tuition fees, which I think is staggering. I also set out 4 very clear things that Labour would actually do for young people, and I think it's noticeable that the other candidates haven't been able to match those. And Julian makes a very strong case for himself, but he makes no mention of his party, and I understand why that is. But the key thing is, I watched closely your responses to the various candidates, and there were lots that was being said by Rupert, Julian, and I'd say myself, that you like, but there's only one person who can actually deliver it, because none of these things can be done by the Liberal Democrats. It's not a question of being scared, it's actually the truth. Rupert talks about the Greens coming 3rd last time. Well, actually the figures was they only just got over 3,000 votes. The winning post is 19,000 votes. Now, Rupert's a great optimist, and I love optimism in life and politics. But in 50 days' time, it's either going to be a Conservative government or a Labour government. But the people I represent and work with, the people who are queuing up at the food bank, the people who are waiting in accident and emergency at Addenbrooke's because of what's happened to the National Health Service, it's a stunning figure. 13,000 people waiting more than 4 hours in accident and emergency in the last couple of years, when Labour was in power, hardly any at all. So some of you will have been there, some of you will have friends and family who have been there, you'll know what it's like. It's only going to get worse. This is the actual real choice. Now, I can actually deliver these things because I'll be part of a Labour government that can do these things. Neither Julian nor Rupert can do that. So that's the choice. In the end, Cambridge will determine the outcome of the election. You are really, really important. It's a sober, serious choice. You can either make a symbolic gesture or you can actually do something responsible for yourselves and for so many other people who desperately need a change. Thank you very much.
Final closing statement, Jamali Fernando.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. It has actually been a very fun hustings, listening to a bit of the tittle-tattle and yaboo that you might get in the House of Commons, but also a very engaging audience, so thank you for that. And it's amazing to see the number of people trying to climb in, and there's a gentleman almost hanging off the door frame there. On tuition fees, very simply, our position is this. At the moment, you do pay for your tuition fees. It's like a loan system, and once you start earning over £21,000, that's when you pay back at the rate of £7 a week, okay? But you are investing in a world-class education, so don't forget that. If you fail to pay back after 30 years, the loan gets wiped out entirely, okay? No other country that has any kind of fee system offers an eradication of the loan. So we're sitting in a room with the future of this country. Cambridge is a city of pioneers in science, technology, innovation, research. We are the global seat of learning. We have an international place in the world. You need an MP for Cambridge who doesn't just focus on your wheelie bins and your recycling initiatives and what's happening on your doorstep, but a champion for tackling the bigger global issues of today. Climate change, tackling global child poverty. We can do it here from in Cambridge because we have the brightest minds in this city. So elect someone who can be that champion for you. Why does this city, for the last... I lived in Cambridge 16 years ago before coming back as the candidate. For 16 years, this city has suffered from traffic problems. Why can't we sort that out? It's a very basic scenario. It's because we always are looking inward. Put Cambridge on the map. Take Cambridge to Westminster and beyond. That is where Cambridge should be.
Like Buzz Lightyear.
In this room, you have the opportunity, with a Conservative government, to access apprenticeships, to access university, to access jobs. It is ultimately, you know, if you've got £5 in your wallet today, there is no chance that you should go and spend £7. It just doesn't make sense. So ultimately, what you want is a country that's going forward, giving you the opportunities to realise your goals. Vote Conservative, vote Jamali Fernando, vote for you.
A big thank you to all the candidates who came to here today.